Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. It's Tori and I'm only slightly giddy about this live stream tonight because I am getting a chance to sit down with the author of one of my favorite books of 2024, By Blood, by Salt. This beautiful novel right here. And I'm joined by JL Odom. Jamie, welcome to the channel.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
I'm so glad you're here too. We've got some people showing up already. We've got fellow epic fantasy author Andrew Meredith, Phil, hello, Echo. I think you're going to love it, Andrew. I'm so excited for you to read it. Which, before we get started,
yes,
whether you're watching the replay or you're in the chat, down in the description box below us, there's no excuse. It's in every format except audiobook. So the Kindle, paperback, and hardcover of this book are linked in the description box, and you should be buying it if you don't already have it. Just saying. So Jamie, for anybody who doesn't know, because you're pretty new on the scene of indie fantasy, and you just, SPFBO finalist right out the gate. Congratulations, by the way. So if you want to just introduce yourself to everybody and let us know a little bit about you and a little bit about the Land of Exile.
So I am from Oklahoma. I'm actually in Oklahoma right now, which is not where I usually am. We're a military family, so we move around all the time, but we're home visiting family. And I have an amazing husband who has been extremely supportive of this very wild publishing journey, and I have 5 kids. I obviously love writing, I love reading, and I love jujitsu. And I was in the Marine Corps for 5 years as an Arabic translator, which was a very influential time period in my life. And anyone who has read the book
you can see it.
Figure that out pretty quickly, both with the military influences and the language influences and the cultural influences.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the short version. And I think it's probably good enough.
Yeah. So tell me, so as we're going back to kind of introduce people to the opening of By Blood, by Salt, when they open the first few pages of this book, what are they going to find?
They are going to find a culture in which there are lots of different prejudices and a lot of different religions and very complicated relationships between these peoples. And they're going to find a soldier who is in a very tricky position and just sort of has to walk a careful line between his own beliefs, his own ethnic background, and the military unit that he's part of.
Mm.
So, and then there's going to be dangers afoot later on.
Well, that's one of the questions I'm always very interested in when I talk to authors, especially when you have something like an epic fantasy series, because there's a lot, right? We have this huge world and these cultures and these conflicts that we're working with, lots of different POVs. What makes Azetla the right character to start us off and kind of be our anchor through the series?
So there's a few things, like on the surface of it, everybody loves an underdog. Like this is
absolutely,
these are just the facts. But I wanted more than just that. I didn't simply want him to be like, he's downtrodden, but he's so strong. That's fine. That's a good starting point. I wanted someone who was always in a position of having to reassess his own perspective. So even though, and it would be easy to have an underdog who's just like, this sucks for me and you all are wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But instead, I wanted a character who experienced these prejudices and these really difficult situations, but who also has his own prejudices and his own biases, and it has to navigate those and has to really reflect on some of his own moral failings.
Right.
And to me, that's the most interesting thing. Less so someone who just that revelation of your own moral flaw and going, actually, I don't have everything together the way I thought it did. I don't have this quite right yet.
Right. So. Right. Well, I think often in fantasy, it's very easy to kind of fall into a pitfall. And that's not really a pitfall, because there are some stories that call for heroes like this, but we have the hero, right? And the hero is the guy that, whether he's an underdog or not, he's right in some way, and I think it's easy to kind of skip those layers when you're writing these characters of, okay, well, here's this person who's being, the victim of all these prejudices. What are his prejudices, and how does he reflect that back on the people around him? And kind of along with that, you tackle some very heavy topics in this series. Like you were talking about the racial prejudices, the religious prejudices, all of these different things. And one of the things I've noticed about fantasy, having read a lot of it at this point, is that sometimes authors can come in and kind of, it almost feels like a bludgeon a little bit, where it's very heavy-handed. And one of the things that I found really refreshing about your book is that you just let the characters tell the story. It didn't ever feel like you as an author were coming in to say, hey, did you notice? Like it was very natural, and it was just so seamlessly integrated into the characters and the story that it never felt, I was never like, okay, Jamie, I see you. So how, like, in dealing with those, was it just kind of a natural, yep, this is something I want to talk about, or did you have a specific way you wanted to handle those?
I actually did. That was something I thought about a lot, because I have read stories that were very heavy-handed when they were trying to deal with different types of discrimination or prejudice or racial conflict or anything like that. And I think what I really wanted is I wanted to go at it from an angle where whoever's perspective you're in, with a few exceptions, you can hopefully at least relate to some of their perspectives. And in fact, I would, rather let everyone have whatever ammunition it is they have against the other group and believe it, and then have to process it from that place, rather than just saying, well, obviously this person is wrong, because I find that so boring. There aren't times where people do things that are blatantly wrong. Of course, that there are obvious wrongs and beliefs that we're like, that's abhorrent. It's just flat out abhorrent.
Right.
If you're trying to deal with the nuances of just cultural tension in a place where there are all different cultures,
right,
you have to let some of the people who have the bad beliefs also be good in some ways in order for them to be alive on the page. And I really wanted, that is the angle that I want to come at with. That, Azzetla, he has people with prejudice against him. He has to deal with his own prejudices. Everybody has their own biases, and allowing everybody to just have them at whatever rate, amount, intensity they had, and let it run, rather than trying to make sure you knew who you should agree with. That's the intent anyway.
I think it comes across really well. And as I was reading, I couldn't get the mental picture of a mirror out of my head, where you were constantly allowing the plot and the events of the story to hold mirrors up to the characters, where they're confronted by these things, but it never felt like, oh, and then we got to make sure he realizes. It was very, very natural, and I really loved exploring that topic in a less, in a way that didn't feel like I, as the reader, was being told what to think. And
good. That's what I want.
It was perfect. Well done. So I want to go back a little bit. I want to say hi to a couple of folks in the chat. We have Ryan, a fellow author in the house. Hi, Ryan. Joanna Reeds, who is another person I'm going to get to read this book, hopefully in the next couple of years here. Big epic fantasy fan. We've got Casey in the chat. Hi, Casey. She signed me up. Yep. Casey's one of my closest friends, so she definitely will be getting this book.
Yeah, that's strong influence.
Yes. Was only in the first 100 pages, but this is such a good read. I'm very happy I found this new author. And I'm assuming this is a relative of yours. Hello, Joseph. Just a guess. Benjamin Miller says, reading this series next year, love supporting fellow veterans. Well, and the beautiful part is, and in the fantasy world, we love completed series over here. And the fun part is it's a trilogy, and the second book will be out in February. So you're 2/3 done already.
Yes.
So yeah.
I realized, I was like, oh man, part of me was like, I wish I'd finished all before I was the first one.
It's fine.
We're close. We're close.
You've proven that you're continuing the series, I think, at this point. Yeah.
Stop writing.
Fellow author Tim. Hey, Tim. So, okay, let's go back a little bit, pull back from the book a little bit, and just go back to why fantasy? What is it that pulls you into fantasy as a genre?
So I feel like I have, in some way, I have like the slightly disappointing answers. I'm not that interested in magic. I don't dislike it or like, I don't need it. It's not a thing that brings me to fantasy.
Yeah.
The thing that brings me to fantasy is the ability to explore all that human drama in a space of complete freedom,
Right.
where you can heighten the stakes and heighten the challenges and the suffering and the hope and all those things that we like to see, and not be restricted by like, okay, well, we have to make sure that happened in 1737 and we have to make sure
couldn't do it.
I love historical fiction, and
I do too.
If ever I'm super brave and want to read 500 books before I write one, maybe I'll try it. But meanwhile, you have such, you can run so wild and free in fantasy.
Yeah.
And you can explore these dramas and these intense themes in whatsoever way you choose.
Yeah.
That is what draws me to fantasy.
Yeah. Well, and from when we were chatting before too, I know that I'd love for you to share a little bit about how you kind of got into fantasy and going into the influences question a little bit about who are some of, who it is important. Like, who are some of the authors / and not just books, but media that really kind of brought you into fantasy?
Well, definitely C.S. Lewis is my favorite author. Now, I adore Narnia, but it's actually a lot of his other works that are the most influential on me, like Till We Have Faces, which is also fantasy.
So excited to read that.
Oh, it's so good. Oh my gosh. It is my book of the life. Like, it's the book that I'm like, this is
nice.
The book.
Yeah, the book. Love that. I have it on my shelf.
That meant to someone else what that book means to me. I could just die. You know, it'd be fine. I don't know that kids are grown up, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So his work is extremely influential, and I just love the way that he writes. I think his prose is beautiful. I think it's powerful. I love how he pulls in these dramas and these ideas and these mythologies, and it's just me. And then I also really, really love Robin McKinley. She was especially influential on me in my teenage years. I read The Blue Sword by her, The Hero and the Crown, several others, but those two were like, they're the classic fantasy adventure, fighting dragons, you know, stopping bad guys with great magical powers type. Yeah. Riding horse
and sorcery.
Right? Yeah, I mean, it's all in there. And so there was just something so adventurous and so, like, it had that wonder that everyone, when we talk about fantasy, people almost always use the word wonder.
Yeah.
You're in awe of something that you can't quite touch, but it feels so real and you long for it, which C.S. Lewis also talks about that. He's like, if you're longing for something, it's not quite there. It's like this other magical country. That's something that's built in us to desire. Yep. And so I think Robin McKinley and C.S. Lewis were the ones who really like fanned that flame in me.
Yeah. Well, and with the influences of, so I'm very excited to get to Till We Have Faces. That's one of my priority reads for the next year or so here. And I can't remember. I saw a reel on Instagram recently where there was a professor talking to a group of people in an auditorium about how one of the reasons why fantasy is so important in general is that the world has become disenchanted. Like, we've kind of lost in the hustle and bustle and instant gratification of things and how quickly life moves now for a lot of us. We've kind of lost that enchantment of the ordinary and just how amazing the world actually is and all the beauty that we come across. And I think fantasy makes us, like, kind of, not in a bad way, but forces us back into that kind of enchanted mentality very easily. So you mentioned you're not drawn in by magic systems.
Yeah, I don't dislike them. I just,
Sure.
that's not the thing. Like, I think for some people, the idea of magic existing is filled them with such longing, which I understand. But for me, the magic is merely like just another possibility
Right.
that exists within the realm of just making up your own world.
Right. So when you in Land of Exile, would you, which this is the series, by the way, I'm probably confusing people by not calling it in By Blood by Salt. How, like, on a scale of 1 to 10, where would you put the magic system in terms of how prevalent it is?
I would say it is extremely subtle and open to interpretation.
Yes.
So basically, again, this is tricky because you haven't read Till We Have Faces yet, and I don't want to say too much, but Till We Have Faces, not the entire book, but there's a portion of the book that was actually very inspirational for how I approached the supernatural in my book, which is that you let the reader be a little uncertain and let them
Yes.
go, well, is it true or is it not?
Yeah.
Is this otherworldly or is it not? Is it supernatural or is it not? And in my case, I don't necessarily give quick or easy or clear answers on that. Certainly not in book one.
Well, and I think that's one of the reasons why I was so surprised. Like, and we were talking about this a little behind the scenes before we went live. I've read a lot of fantasy at this point. It is very difficult for me to be surprised by an author, and I always get very excited when an author can surprise me with something, and not in a bad way. I still enjoy so much of what I read. There's so many good books. But that was something I hadn't experienced that I can remember for a long time in your book, where I was sitting there and I was like, I don't actually know if this thing is true or not. And you like kept me there for like a while. And I was very impressed by that. I was like, this is a structure, a storytelling element that I don't experience in books very often. And I really like it now that I've kind of been reintroduced to it. I would say one of, and not in the same way, but another author that kind of had me going back and forth on a character quite a bit throughout the trilogy was Fonda Lee in Greenbone Saga. Because she does that too. When people say, oh, we want flawed characters, but then they read flawed characters and they're like, oh, I don't like that.
Certainty of it.
Right. Yeah. And I think, you know, that those flaws and really leaning into them just adds so many more layers to the characters. We've got Matt Keene in the audience now. Hey, Matt. I saw Andrew says, Great Divorce is a great book. I need to finish the Space trilogy still. I haven't read that either.
It divides people, but I love it.
I'm trying to remember. Is that the one that starts with Out of the Silent Planet?
Out of the Silent
I've read the first one.
That Hideous Strength, yeah.
Yeah. Micah says, I love By Blood by Salt. McScarfield says, not going to lie, Mrs. Odom being a veteran, an Arab linguist, a jiu-jitsu practitioner, and a mother of 5 is a sales pitch all on their own. I agree. That is an incredibly impressive resume. Well, and I think it's you can see so much of your life experience in your book. And I have always been a big believer that you can see into the soul of an author a little bit through the window of their book.
Yes.
And I love, like, you, so much of that comes through in your book. So as we're kind of digging into characters, it's very obvious from page 1, character is a big deal for you.
Yes.
So what is your character development process like? Does Zetla just show up and like, okay, I'm writing you into a book now? Or did you have to kind of find him, if that makes sense?
I definitely did. He started out as a little bit more of an archetype.
Sure.
So, I like heroic characters, but I also like gritty characters that have to kind of really go through it, and it's not always like clear or obvious or easy for them. So there's the starting point was still very similar to who he is, but of course there needed to be depth and breadth added to that character. And one of the main things for me was allowing him to have those flaws, and those kind of what woke him up in my mind, because I was really, for a long time, I just wanted him to be a very classically heroic character. And a lot of old versions, like very old versions, he hasn't been that way for a long time. But a lot of old versions, I really kept trying to like protect him from too many moral failings, protect him from too many compromises so that I could still say he was a good guy and not have anyone question that. And it just did not work. And he just didn't feel real at all.
Right.
And once I started just like scooping out all of the actual flaws that I have and throwing them at him, we have them at last. Behold, he actually existed now. And then the cool thing about that for me is the fruit of that has been one of the most consistent things, even with people who like the book wasn't totally their thing. They're still like, yeah, because that was a really good character. But you know, I didn't like his thing that people will point out time and time again as being this really complex, interesting character. And I'm like, man, all that heartache I had and all that, you know, soul searching I had to do to try and like bring him to life with his own flaws and with his own mess.
Right.
That and that's really where it comes from. Me, it comes from me going, what horrible thing have I thought? What terrible thing have I done? What, you know, bitterness, pride, cruelty, awful thought have I ever had? And I'm just like, okay.
So it's like a therapy session almost.
I don't even know I would quite okay, but it's like the more honest I am about my own flaws, the easier it is for me to let my characters be real. And the more I shield myself from my own flaws, the flatter my characters are. It's an inevitable process.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that's a really good way of putting it. Yeah, because I think we kind of try to polish our characters a little bit too much sometimes, and it makes them feel a little bit more one note. They're not as, you know, relatable because we all, you know, none of us are perfect. So when you have these characters that are trying to be perfect, it feels a little bit less sincere, I think. So you kind of alluded to this already, and I know about this already, but I'd love for you to share with the audience. You can always, not always, but I feel like you can tell when you open a book and you start reading and this author has lived in this world for a long time. And By Blood, by Salt felt like that immediately to me. I was like, she has been here for a while. So how long have you been building this story?
So I would say that the actual one that actually ended up going all the way, and I wrote all 3 books at once actually, but they of course had to get worked over quite a bit. But the one that actually lived to tell the tale instead of previous iterations was like 17 or 18 years ago. And that had some other seedlings that came before it all the way back to high school from a high school assignment that would be unrecognizable, but if you want to go that far, you can. You can. Yeah. But starting from when I actually said, okay, I think I know what this thing actually is, and I'm going to try and write it again. And I sat down in Iraqi dialect class in Fort Gordon. And they've changed the names of a lot of the places, so I don't know if it's still called Fort Gordon or if they changed its names, but it was Fort Gordon then. And I had already done an Iraqi dialect intro, and so it was repetitive and I was bored, so I just pulled out my class notebook and started writing a scene, and then just never stopped for the next 5 years. So that would have been when I was like, like 18 years ago, 17 18 years ago that I did that, and it's been worked over and lamented over and struggled over on and off throughout all that time.
Yeah. So I'm very intrigued. Languages are so interesting to me. I absolutely love language. I love when fantasy authors use them in their books. I love learning new languages. How did your experience as an Arabic linguist factor into the culture and the world building of this series? Because I think it's such a it definitely has that kind of Middle Eastern flavor to it very heavily through it, which I love. So I'd love to hear like how your experiences influence the book.
So I grew up hearing Hebrew, so I had a familiarity with, one Middle Eastern language growing up. I didn't really speak it, but I could, read and write a little. I knew a little. And then I became an Arabic linguist later on in life. And I actually had access to all sorts of language resources. So I was actually able to grow in both languages at the same time. And so by the time I ever even started writing this, those two languages specifically were such an inextricable part of my identity and my job and literally my everyday life that it to me almost became like the very pathway through which I wrote the story.
Sure.
Specifically, I know that there's like, we have to be a little careful how we talk about certain characters and things, but obviously there is a character that is a little bit more mysterious, around whom the language factor is extremely important. And that's based on several very specific experiences I had as a translator. Experience where I found myself the only person in the room who understood what everyone was saying, where I found being like the carrier of all the words, and finding that also when you are a translator or an interpreter, people, depending on what circumstance you're in, if you're in the military, you are putting your life in that person's hands, because they are letting you know what is or is not being said, and they are telling everyone what you are saying. And it is just, it's such a strangely, you are not the person in charge, but you are the person who ensures that everyone comprehends. And that, those experiences were life-changing for me, and they completely shaped how I view life in the military, and like how power actually works and who really has the most influence. Because if you're withholding words from people,
makes a big difference.
That changes everything.
Right.
So that was one big factor. And of course, just being in the military in general was obviously a huge influence on me, because that was just, when in the sort of college age time, I was in Iraq. So that was the work. I was in Cairo training for a dialect. I was, and then I was deployed to Iraq a few times, and I had, a lot of different experiences there. Obviously the whole thing starts with a battalion, and I probably chose even a battalion, like as opposed to any other type of unit, because of, I was in Reaper. That's where I was, and I just chose it. We're just stuck with it because that's what I chose when I was 22.
Yeah. Was in your travels, was there a place that like geographically left a really big impact on you? Because I'm sure, I mean, I can't even imagine seeing all of those different locations, and it would be amazing.
There's several like landscape influences. Ironically, one of them is actually the American Southwest, even though that's not in the Middle East.
That makes sense.
It's profoundly impactful to me. I love the American Southwest. I love all its different rock formations and deserts and everything. I think it's just the most beautiful thing. But also, I got to do a lot of really, really cool hikes when I was living in Israel. And I, hiked different wadis and different beautiful trails. So the Judean hills are something that's just into my mind, is the smell of it. I can smell it when I talk about it. And the just climbing through the wadis and going in all these different, like, they're like, narrow, small canyons.
Yeah.
And then when I was in Iraq, I didn't get to go see any like major terrain features. It was very barren. But the wind would pick up. There would be what they called red days, which is where the dust just fills the air, and then the sun sets, and then everything looks red, like pure red. And you can hardly see, you can hardly breathe. And there are multiple scenes like that in the books, because that was such a strange, surreal experience. But it's a real thing that really happens in parts of the Middle East. And so all of those different locations and were just, I mean, they're like in my heart. I love these places.
Yeah. Well, it infuses the book so much with that kind of, like I was saying before, lived in feel. You can tell that these places are inspired by your own experiences, and they come very vibrantly alive because of that, I think. See, I have catch up a little bit on the comments really quick before we keep going. Chadwick says, looking forward to the audiobook coming out any day.
I don't have a date for that, but it is.
It is
press.
awesome.
And I'm not going to put a date because I don't want to like be wrong about that. But it is.
That's exciting. Casey says, give me all the flawed characters. Agreed.
Yes.
Patrick says, making characters is always tough, but the process is super rewarding. I feel like we find out a lot about ourselves as people when we're creating characters.
You take a knife to your own soul and like, what's in there?
Exactly. Let's see. Matt says, these books sound so cool. Matt, I'm like, so I have to do a little humble brag really quick because in the mail today, perfect timing, I received A Hunt for Jackals, the advanced reader version, and I'm so giddy about it. I can't handle it. Like the fact that I'm here on this live stream instead of reading this book right now. And I'm so far behind on new releases. I barely keep up with what's coming out. And I was like, when can I have this? How soon can I have it in my hands? And I don't know if you guys can see, but Jamie, we would like to shout out your artist because these covers are amazing.
His name is Jeremy Adams, and he does beautiful work.
Yeah. Oh, I forget my camera's not mirrored. Yeah, look at the colors are beautiful. The landscape is really beautiful. So yeah, I'm very excited. The only thing that's wrong with this book is that it's not full of tabs yet. That's it.
Just your tab.
Get to do new colors this time.
I'm gonna love that.
Avid Book Junkie says hello. Phil says Fort Gordon is Fort Eisenhower now.
They changed names and I can't remember any of the names.
Yeah, that makes sense. Matt says linguists make for such interesting world building. Yeah, and their language is a big part of the books, which is very cool. Loves the cover art. Tim says Israel is such an amazing place to visit. The scenery is out of this world. I would love to visit someday. Okay, so speaking of the military, as a Marine Corps veteran and also a jiu-jitsu martial artist, I'd say you're a fairly good person to talk to about writing military and combat. So I'm curious, like, how you approach writing military and combat. And I have a follow-up question about, like, what are some of the pitfalls that someone with less experience might fall into writing those things?
So many thoughts about this.
Please share. We have all. Please share.
The way that I approach it, I have a couple different things. So when it comes to something that's like a little smaller scale, like it's a one-on-one situation or something that where, martial arts would probably be more, or like anything very small scale.
Yeah.
I approach that from a, more pragmatic, I will choreograph it, but the choreography isn't the key for me. Yeah. I just make sure it makes physical sense.
Right.
And I think for me, having the jiu-jitsu background really helps with that, because
Absolutely.
I can could they realistically do this? Nope, that's fake. So, like, unless you've got some, magical powers, if you're involving magic, that's a different story. But if you've got people who are non-magical and they have, got a size or a strength disparity, and that's something that jiu-jitsu has really taught me, is that size and strength disparities really do matter. And so it doesn't matter if I'm a purple belt and the guy that I am sparring with is a blue belt. So just because I've been doing jiu-jitsu longer than him and I may know a little bit more than him does not mean that he isn't much stronger than me, and that I am still going to have to address that. And that was such a great experience for me, understanding the realities of the physicality of a small encounter. When it comes to combat, however, I consider that to be a totally different ballgame, especially when you're talking anything large scale with like units or cavalry or infantry or something to that effect. With that one, I call in the reinforcements. I have resources.
I bet.
I have people in my life who have experienced lots of combat. And obviously, I know not everybody is able to have those kinds of conversations with people in their life, and maybe they're not comfortable with those kinds of conversations, especially if it's dealing with loss and PTSD and other factors.
Right.
But I do have people in my life that I can have those kinds of conversations with. And I first war game everything. We're talking maps, logistics. It has to make sense. Like, I need it to make sense. And I don't put all that in there necessarily. I want, when I go back to write it, I put back on my storyteller hat.
Right.
But before I do it, I make sure that I have on a tactical and strategic hat, and I check it against the people in my life who know more than I do, because my job as a linguist did not make me a great tactician, I promise.
Sure.
So I check it against people who know more than I do and who do have experience planning operations and doing things that are complex like this. And make sure that it makes tactical and strategic sense. And then once I've handled that and actually made that work, then I have to step back and go, okay, but now that I have this entire field, which is the angle that I want to take, and which one will bring the characters to the fore, and which one will bring the emotional impact to the fore, which one will help you, like, do I want them to do, and you kind of have your different like camera angles. Do you want them to experience fog of war? Do you want it to be a confusing experience? That's okay. Maybe for a short time, maybe not the whole time. Eventually, the reader wants to know something. Or do you want something a little broader where they can actually start to understand what the tactics are and try and see what the bigger picture is? Or do you zoom all the way out and say, here's this broad view?
Bird's eye, yeah.
And I personally think that's why I really like multi-POV for things like this, because then you can do whichever one is going to be most meaningful to the reader. Based on which characters they care about the most, what they need to see, what they need to know, what they don't need to see, what they don't need to know. Right. And so that's where I step back and I go, what now that I have all the practical things and all the logistics worked out, what's going to make this a beautiful story? So yeah, go back and forth from the tedious wargaming red teaming session, and then and go, okay, now how do I tell it as a story?
Right. So when you're doing something smaller scale and you have characters that are kind of, hand-to-hand combat kind of thing, do you have pet peeves of things that you've seen in books where you're like, that's not how that works?
The biggest pet peeve in all the world is the Captain Kirk thing. Your leader cannot just go do whatever he wants, whenever he wants, however he likes. If he's in charge, or if she's in charge, they need to step back and actually empower their subordinates to do the job. And so that's the one that I really, and I understand why people do it. They have their, leader guy. He's cool, right? We love him. He's awesome. So he's got to do all the cool stuff.
Yeah.
And
yeah, delegate.
So I think that's one that I get really upset about. And I'm not someone who says you have to portray all the logistics of warfare.
Sure.
I understand that readers are just going to be like, I don't care where they got their water. And I'm not saying you need to incorporate it into the story, but even if the reader doesn't need to know it, I feel like I, as an author, want to know it so that if it ever comes up, it makes sense. Right. So whenever people are doing oh, we just grabbed 10,000 men and we did this and we grabbed this, and I'm like, how do you do that? So I don't want people to be tedious about it. I don't feel like you need to explain how you got every little thing everywhere. That's not, but I do want that if I asked you, or if I pushed and said, oh, I think it makes sense. I want to see that it could be real.
Right. There's a way in the world that it's not just there.
Poof. This
magic
5 minutes ago and nothing needs to make sense. So I'm not I want it to feel real. And sometimes things that feel real are how do we get water for everybody?
How do we feed everyone?
That's also super important. Water is a huge deal in my story.
Oh yeah.
you know, and I mean, when we were deployed, they used to have these just giant like pallets of water just like dropped everywhere you go, because otherwise we're having a problem.
Right.
So,
yeah. You can't do all the cool fight things if you're all dehydrated.
water.
Right. Patrick says love the shout out to logistics. I agree. That's one of the things, and like you said, it doesn't all have to be spelled out, but every once in a while, I have sometimes when I'm tabbing, I have one that's like believable ? Does that make sense to me? Well, and I think too, when you have a lot of experience with something, or access to a lot of experience with something, it kind of ruins you for life in some ways. Like I can't watch movies with spinning wheels in them anymore, because almost never are they operated correctly or like set up correctly, especially if it's a cartoon. Sometimes in like video games, I'll run into a room, my character will run into a room and there's a spinning wheel in the corner, and I'm like, that wouldn't even work. You know, so I think all of us,
nobody else would ever notice or care about, and you're like,
no. Right. Well, and like
we watch movies all the time. My husband and I were like, it doesn't make sense.
That doesn't make sense. It doesn't work like that. Yeah. I think all of us have like little areas of expertise where
a spinning wheel is a very impressive one. That is I'm just saying, I wouldn't know if it was wrong or not.
Well, I only know because I've been doing it for a long time, but I started and had no idea what I was doing either. So
it's very impressive.
It's very cool. I said I did a little bit of a spinning demo on one of my live streams, or not my live stream. It was Kayla from Kay's Hidden Shelf. She had her 2,000 subscriber milestone celebration, and we were doing a crafty night. And so I brought my spinning wheel and spun a little bit. And first of all, I hadn't spun in like 2 years, and I was like, okay, I just hope that this doesn't fall apart on me. But yeah, it's a cool thing to be able to, and I'm sure language is like that too, where you're connecting with something that people have either been speaking or doing for thousands of years.
Yeah.
And that's something that's very cool, that kind of connection back through time. McScarfield says, playing OpForce Red Team during military exercises was very fun. I remember my Sarge went full Rambo with dual wielding MG3's final day. To quote a lieutenant, and we are getting paid for this. That sounds like fun. Hop says, I like chess, and a lot of times when a chessboard is shown in a movie, pieces are on the wrong color. Yeah, I can see that.
You hone in on it because you're like,
I've never thought of that, but now I'm going to notice the chessboard in every, okay, so I want to shift from the military aspect to the other part of your very impressive resume, which is that you are a homeschool mom of 5 children, which is a resume all by itself.
Yes.
And might even be slightly more impressive than Marine Corps and Jiu-Jitsu.
Homeschool mom. Days where it's not so impressive, I promise you.
So, okay, this is something that I'm really interested in, because we're kind of coming from the same spot here. You're raising your children, you have this passion for writing, and you're doing both at the same time while your children are still very young, which is a lot. And I know how much that is to wrangle. Yeah, it's a lot. So first of all, go you. Congratulations for publishing books and everything. What do you hope in the future your children take away from your books?
Oh, well, right now it is a bit of a mess, because they'll sometimes even say, Mom, you're doing too much writing. I'm like, no, actually, I'm checking Instagram too much, because I'm like to post. I'm like, I'm actually just learning how to use social media, and that's on me, kid. I'm sorry. What I do see already is that they do have a passion for reading that even before I published the book, but came from my love for reading and writing.
Yeah.
And they're starting to want to tell their own stories. And the fun thing is they're also now in the last, let's call it 7 months, whatever it is since the book published, they're like, Mom, I wrote this. I'm going to get it published. And they're now like the nature of it shifted a little bit to where they want to share their work in not just mom and dad, but maybe share it with other people. And my oldest is very artistic, and my next one is he's a storyteller, both storytellers in very different ways.
Yeah.
The two oldest who are like the strongest readers.
Mm-hmm.
And it is sorry, it is
You're good.
fascinating to see their joy and their love of story and their desire to share that. Their enthusiastic, unending to share it. But it definitely is still a challenge to strike the balance, because since this is all that we mentioned, very new to me.
Yeah.
I am still sort of in a bit of like the tumult of going like, okay, how do I be present with my kids and give them the best that I have while still doing this passion project that I think is very beautiful and very valuable, and that I hope they will also appreciate when they, when they grow up. Once or twice, my 7, well, no, he's 8 years old now. My 8-year-old be like, Mom, I'm going to read By Blood, by Salt. I'm like, okay. And he's like, okay, I'm not ready to read it yet. It's a little advanced for him. And so I'm like, that's okay. I don't think you're ready for it.
It's okay. Yeah.
But every now and then they kind of want to. They're just not there yet.
Right.
So I think I just really hope that as long as I can grow in character and grow in balance and perspective, and finding the right way to balance these two things in a way that's healthy and appropriate. And giving them the best that I have, which is more, as much as I love this book and as much as I poured my soul into it, obviously they're way more important.
Yeah.
But also just the joy of creating beautiful things and getting to share that with people, which already are showing in such cool and exciting ways.
Yeah, I've experienced some of that too, where my kiddos they're very imaginative storytellers in their games to begin with, but all 3 of my kids I'm going to write a book someday, and this is what it's going to be about, and I'm going to get it published. And it's so fun to see them like, and also, and this is something that I think is normal for us, but not outside of the more heavy reader community, is looking at the creation of art as a important part of our lives.
Yeah.
It's not nerdy. It's not less than. It's an important part of what they're growing up with. And I think that that's really cool. And hopefully allows them to have a deeper appreciation of all kinds of art going forward into their adult lives too.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I love just the joy they have in like sharing their creative things. It's
Yeah, I have a huge pile of things on my nightstand where my kids will come in and, Mom, I made this for you. Mom, I made this for you. And it's always something different. It's always, the favorite color changes every other day. And it's fun to see them trying things. And my middle daughter, who's 9, is starting to now get to the point where she's been drawing long enough that she's starting to see some improvement in her talent. And she's starting to notice it now. And I'm starting to point it out to her more. I'm like, look, do you see how you've been doing this for a long time? And you're starting to like improve in these different areas, and how cool that is. Like, that's really awesome. So that also it kind of teaches a diligence too. Cause like, as both of us know,
the fruit of their effort.
Yeah.
And what's really fun for me is when, as a parent, you're always going to want to encourage your kids. You're not going to sit there and say, that's not a very good stick figure.
Right.
Oh, honey.
Did great.
What's really cool is when you kind of transfer from that part where you praise them because they put in a good effort, and you praise them because, they're trying something new, to where you go, oh my gosh.
You're getting really good at this. Yeah.
Actually, transition to where they start to, you see their talents grow and their skills grow, and you're just like, wow.
Yeah. Well, and it's cool that they're learning that the diligence too, because as we know, it takes a long time to write books, and anything worth doing is worth doing well and putting in your time. And it's very cool. So as you've been so you're new to the book community online. and you're coming in and learning all of the things. So how has that process been? Because I know like there's writing a book and then there's marketing a book, and those are two completely different skill sets.
Well, I will say, will shout out my husband, who has been like so helpful, especially with some of the more like tedious paperwork oriented,
Yep.
like all those million things you didn't even know you were going to have to do those things. And I suck at those things.
Same.
And so I've had help. So let's say that first.
Takes a village.
Yes. But also just, I wasn't really, I kind of avoided social media for a really long time.
That's fair.
I was like, I don't trust myself to have good habits. So, I'm just going to leave that stuff to the side. I didn't have Instagram. I didn't have anything for the most part, not very much. And then I wasn't immunized against like the addictive nature of it.
Yep.
And then to go straight into that, not only with just generally now having to interact with social media and try to do that in a healthy and meaningful way, it's all tied into this thing of my soul that I've poured my life into. And so it's not every time I do something on Instagram, it's just, oh, I'm sharing a cool photo. It's I'm sharing my soul. And I want to see if you guys like that or not. So it has a layer to it that it makes it even worse.
It's very vulnerable. Yeah.
And so much harder to extricate myself and just back off and be like, okay, I did the things I need to do to show people what I have to share.
Right.
I've done the right things that I ought to do to be responsible to my work. And now I can just step back and be with my family and then, go back and treat it like a job, which I can only to a little bit, because there is just this there's an emotional intensity to how much I love the work and how desperately I hope for it to reach the right readers.
Right.
That emotional intensity kind of like sets me out of whack. So that has been very challenging.
Yeah.
And it is a process where I am still learning how to create a healthy balance with marketing the work through these channels, while then being able to like shut the door and step back and not just be completely mentally tied to it all the time. It's really challenging. It's so like I'm new to it and still working out the details.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like too, because there's so many different platforms, you're not just learning like, oh, here's Instagram. Say, here's Instagram, here's Twitter, here's Blue Sky, here's Discord, here's YouTube, here's so many. Yeah. And I think, for anybody that comes into the community new, I always really encourage them to just pick one and just start with one. And once you kind of get that under your belt and you have a good relationship with it, add something else, because it is a lot. It's a lot. Zin just showed up. Hi, Zin. Welcome. I thought this one was really funny. Chadwick said, I love how both of you have water jugs as large as your heads. Yeah. Mom life. Yeah. I grew up drinking juice and milk. Like I didn't know what water was until I was an adult. And I have since discovered that I am just a much healthier, nicer person when I drink enough water, weirdly.
Well, it's a little bit of a in joke in my family, because anytime someone has any slight ailment, struggle, tweak, anything, my husband's all like, well, have you been drinking enough water?
We do that too.
Where my one of my sisters-in-law rolls her eyes to all the way to the back of her head whenever like she's like, I'm drinking water. You can't be sure that everything happens is because I'm not drinking water. I mean, it's a joke, but everybody, it's we're as a family, we're teased about it, because my husband's like, have you drank enough water? That's probably why you're not feeling well.
Yeah. But the sad part is how like 80% of the time that's true.
That's the thing. It's often correct.
Yeah. I know when my kids come in, and if they even mention a headache, that is my first question every time, especially for headaches, is like, speaking of which, everyone watching, whether you're in the replay or in the chat, drink break, take a drink, take care of yourself as we're zoned out. Yeah, I also am a big fan of mason jars, and I get teased about this on my channel all the time because some people are convinced that I have moonshine or something in here, which is not true. I would
You would be articulate if that's
so I wouldn't I would not be able to host this interview if there was moonshine in that mason jar. Hop says we homeschooled R3. Nice. I was homeschooled all the way from up until college, and then had to figure out, oh, okay, so there's a classroom, and like we can't walk around while we're doing schoolwork. And if it's not in the syllabus, so help you.
Yeah. We were homeschooled like on and off. So I've had pretty much almost every school experience you can like like it was a public charter school, and I was homeschooled, and I was a co-op and all these things. But when I got into like a proper, like every day, 8 hours a day type school, I was like, I just want to do what I want to do, guys. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know about this business where I have to be in a certain place at a certain time.
Yeah, could we work something else out? Yeah, I remember a couple of times because I had learned, especially in my high school years, I was very independent learning, because at that age, that's kind of the goal, is to get your kids to, be very self-sufficient. And I remember a couple of times going in to talk to professors because I really wanted to do an extra project along with something we were doing that kind of went along with whatever topic. And you could have heard a pin drop because they're like, it's not, but it's not, it's like they short circuit, like it's not on the syllabus and you want to do more. Like they can't. Why? Because it's cool. I don't know. Yeah, that was a very fun experience. Well, and I mean, I went through college with my husband, which was great fun. So we had all but 2 classes together in 4 years, 2 to 3 classes together. It was awesome. So yeah, English majors. Okay, so let's delve back into the book a little bit, and I'm trying to think how, because I'm keeping this as non-spoiler as possible for everyone watching, just so nobody's panicked. Please go buy the book and read it. I'm trying to remember because I have so many notes, and I feel like how much of this I can actually ask you from a non-spoiler. Okay, I want to talk about culture a little bit.
All right.
Okay, because we talked about language and that the presence of that in the book, but you're creating quite a few different cultures that all clash in even in the first book already. And I feel like creating a culture and a perspective within that culture is also, it's like building a character where you want those layers and you want all of the details of the religion and the economy and the how rituals. Yeah. So where do you start?
I think that I fully believe there are like probably 1,000 awesome ways to do this, but the way that works best for me as someone who actually is a history lover and who had very specific cultural experiences in the work that I did. I don't ever want everything to be like a 1-to-1 match. Like this culture exactly is meant to mirror this real world culture. That's okay. Some stories do that, and I think that's fine. But in my case, I wanted to have the freedom to say I could use an inspiration, but I don't want it to be like this can only equal this one real world culture.
Right.
That's all that inspired it. But I would usually start with something in the real world that I saw or experienced that really struck me. Work from there. So for instance, of course, in the one of the areas where in Trico of the desert, where a lot of the events take place, there's a lot of different tribes. And I mean, there's, multiple tribes mentioned, more than I would really expect to care to try to keep up with. I didn't do that to overwhelm them, but to imply that there's more than you might find relevant at this exact moment.
Right.
And that was based off of a very specific experience where when I was deployed, and part of my job involved me having to be pretty well like comprehending Iraqi politics. And I was surprised to find how much tribal interactions and tribal backgrounds influence people's in a different way than you would think of in ancient times. But
Right.
nevertheless, it still mattered, and it was still influential. And also from Oklahoma, and honestly, like if you look on a ballot in Oklahoma, you're going to find some various like measures that have to do with different tribal political situations here in Oklahoma.
Right.
So seeing these modern times where these tribal politics actually really matter to people and actually influence their daily lives and have such a they're important, and they and I think that was sort of like a little seedling that I used to go, okay, this is something that I think a lot of people think of as this narrow old-fashioned thing that we don't have anything to do with anymore in this like in modern times, but it's not really true.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to, even though the story does sort of take place in a fictional past, I wanted to talk about the meaning of like tribal politics and how that can influence you when maybe you don't know very much about it and you're an outsider and you're having to navigate that. So that's just an example.
Yeah.
And then I would work my way from there rather than simply trying to overlay, oh, well, it's just like Iraqi tribes, or it's just
Right.
like Native American tribes in Oklahoma, or it's just like this other tribal situation. It's not like any of those exactly, but they are some of the layers that I use to bring in and to kind of like then slowly like clay, like shape it from there.
Yeah, make it its own thing.
Yeah, so I would use things like that. I also use like a lot of things from like ancient Judea, or from Jewish history. There were a lot of influences that I would take little seedlings from that and say, here's a specific period in Jewish history where these events happened. How can I kind of use that as sort of an inspiration to shape out how this event goes down?
Right.
And there are more other inspirations than those, but that is kind of, and from there, I would just always look for details that feel real, like feel like something that maybe isn't real to our world, but you're like, that makes sense. That feels like something that could exist. I could imagine walking through this place and seeing these little totems or these little things that is part of this culture that I don't need to know the whole picture of, but
yeah,
start to see it. It's like a
adds detail
of you with these details.
Yeah. Well, and kind of along, not necessarily culture related, but there's quite a few different fighting styles in the book, and I'm always very intrigued by, we have the typical sword and sorcery where everyone has a sword and they, and I really liked, you have archery, you have a sword and a combo of swords, or a combo of a knife and a sword, and you have horseback, like some fighting on horseback, there's a lot of different types of going back to combat just a little bit, a lot of different types of combat in the books. And that's something I always really appreciate, is seeing an author who like gives each character a chance to kind of have their own style from that is sometimes influenced by the culture they're from. And I had to ask, are you an archery fan on top of everything else? That's what I was kind of wondering.
that was, I mean, I don't know that there's probably a kid that ever didn't stick a string on a piece of string
absolutely,
try to make a bow. Like every kid did that. So I don't think I'm special that way. I did that a lot, but I did, like I was always asking for bows, and I did eventually get one, and I would just go out in our backyard and sometimes go down. I live with my parents. This is actually the house I was born in, just in case you're interested.
Nice.
We're right by the Arkansas River.
Cool.
And so I would just go out and wander about in the river that is really just kind of a sandy puddle most of the time, and just go out and just like shoot arrows into the river and then hopefully find them. And I have gone bow hunting once or twice, not successfully, but you got to try.
Yeah, absolutely.
You gotta try. So I love archery.
Well, I could tell. It was interesting. You mentioned a while ago, we were talking about who's really in power in situations. And I think that was another theme that I didn't write down at the time that I was reading the book, but now looking back at it, is such an incredibly present theme throughout the entire By Blood, by Salt book, because it seems like the power shifts almost every other chapter.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that was really impressive to me, is just that it made sense. I don't know how you did that, but that is something that you really allowed the characters to explore, because you think, oh, okay, so this person's kind of the like final say, or what they're doing or saying is going to affect what happens next. And then all of a sudden it was like, but they're not in control, and somebody else is got that power shift. And I think that was also something that I found really interesting about and surprising about the way you were using your storytelling to kind of roll that. I was never sure what side of the die we were on. Yeah.
Yeah, that was that. Well, I mean, I think that's just because a lot of times you don't, there's like, technical power and perceived power, and you can have someone who's in authority, but maybe people don't respect them very much, or you have someone who's in authority and everyone respects them a lot. And it really depends. Like if you're in a military environment, the person who's in charge is in charge. And if you just go, oh, well, I don't like him, so he doesn't get to be in charge, that doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
You have to learn how to cope with the person who's in charge, regardless of how good they are at that position.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's, kind of where you, in the same way that, like, if you've got like a bad, sorry, I have a dog that's asking in. I don't know why she's not coming in through the door. You've got like a weak muscle, and everything else compensates around it to address that. And when you have like a flawed commander, or you have a complicated, as what we have in the battalion in the story, is a complicated command situation.
Yes.
Where there's people who are officially in power and people who are less officially in authority. And so you kind of, everyone creates these sort of like slightly bent functionings in order to work around what actually makes things work.
Right.
So I'm going to let the dog in. I don't know why.
Absolutely. That's totally fine. So chat, and if you're watching the replay, just a quick reminder that down in the description box below, there are links to every available version of By Blood, by Salt, but also A Hunt for Jackals is coming out on the 25th of February. This is book 2, and it is available for pre-order on Kindle and hardcover currently. So check those out.
I don't know why she wouldn't come in the doggy door. I don't know.
She just wanted to make you get up and work for it. Okay, so to kind of wrap up, one of my last questions for you is, from a reading standpoint, what are some books, because we're always trying to add to our TBRs here, because nobody ever has enough books on their TBR. So what are some books that you, besides Till We Have Faces, which is obviously one that everybody should have on their TBR as a recommendation, what are some of the other books that you have really enjoyed recently-ish that you would love to put on TBRs?
The two that have stood out to me most this year, that's thankfully such an easy question.
Good.
With Hand and Stars, which is by, I don't want to butcher his name, but he's the same author who wrote The Little Prince, the French author.
Oh, yes.
So he wrote this.
Antoine
Saint-Exupéry something.
Yes.
I don't know how to pronounce it. And I sound too stupid.
Well, if the linguist isn't going to pronounce it, I'm not even going to try.
No, French isn't one of my things. He was a pilot in, like, I think the late 20s and early 30s. He actually ended up dying in 1942 overseas on his plane. But before that, he flew the mail, but it was when flying was still very new and extremely dangerous, and there were many airspaces that people had not explored yet, like in South America and other locations, and over the deserts in North Africa. And he just talks about his experiences in the most beautiful way that could be imagined. I felt like I was there. I felt like I was in the plane. I felt like I was seeing the stars from high up, and that I was, we crashed down in the desert waiting to find out if we were going to be attacked. I mean, it was phenomenal and beautiful, and I would recommend it to everyone on the planet. It is
love that.
gorgeous. And then the other one that just blew me away this year was Everything Sad is Untrue by Daniel Nayeri, I think it is. I don't have it with me to double check the name, but it's Everything Sad is Untrue. And the title actually comes from Lord of the Rings, where Sam asks, are all the sad parts of this adventure going to come untrue? To Gandalf. And it's about another memoir. I don't know. Like, I'm a fantasy writer.
Memoirs are amazing. Yep, love it.
Memoirs. And, he writes it as though from his childhood self, about how they fled Iran and ended up in Oklahoma. Maybe that's part of also why I like it.
Close to home.
Up in Oklahoma. And he just tells it in this very non-linear way, all about his experiences when he was in Iran, when they left Iran, when they came to Oklahoma. It's sad, but it's beautiful and poignant. And the way he writes is just, it's amazing. So those two books were probably the ones that just absolutely, I think about them all the time. And I read both of those this year. I was just so happy to read those books.
I always encourage people to read widely, because I think no matter what genre you write in, like, I find so many different genres incredibly helpful when writing fantasy. And I think memoirs, if you're writing characters, read memoirs, honestly.
Yes. Oh my God.
They're so good. I love memoirs. And
you have so much freedom. Like the writers of memoirs, they have the freedom to just look, they're just telling you what they feel and think. And like there's no restrictions there. And so there can often be some of the most poetic language and the richest description of emotion and visceral experience. It's just phenomenal.
I totally agree.
Those are the most recent amazing reads.
Okay, let me just make sure that I haven't missed anybody. Hi, Zero. How's it going? Thank you for joining us. Engine says, I did the same with water. I've developed a fondness for black coffee with no cream and sugar. That's impressive. Couldn't do it. That's right. You told me about that. Yet I didn't understand why anyone would drink wild water in my childhood. Yeah, I don't know why kids are so averse to water. I don't know.
Mine don't have a choice.
Yeah, mine don't either. Sarah Beth says, I've been here for a bit, was feeding my dogs. I heard enough that I added this to my Amazon cart. Awesome. I hope you enjoy it, Sarah. This is going to be the book that everybody's going to get to about middle of 2025 and be like, so Tori made another video and By Blood, by Salt was on it again. So everybody just be prepared. It's going to be on there. Engine was when we were talking about culture. Something I love about fantasy sci-fi is homogenous cultures among a certain people or fantasy race. I encountered a fellow Trekkie who disagreed and complained that Klingons are too monocultural, but the monocultural aspect lets me understand the commonalities between Klingons. It streamlines my ability to know many characters, but still appreciating the exceptions. Yeah, I think, I don't know what you would say to this, Jamie, but I feel like there's different viewpoints. You can look at all the different cultures next to each other, or you can zero in.
Like, and I think you can work with either. It just depends on what kind of story you want to tell and what you're looking for.
Exactly.
If you're saying I want to experience all these characters and I have this nice cultural baseline for them where I know what they share. And then if it deviates from that, that's really interesting. And I can work with that. Or in the case, like for me, I was like, I want like these like million threads of how cultures, like the book I'm reading right now actually does that. I'm loving this book, right? It's called The Rock by Kanan Makia, but it's all about the conflation of cultures and religion in the 7th century in Jerusalem. And
oh my
gosh, I'm loving it. The point is, it's complicated and confusing, and you're not ever quite sure who belongs to what and who agrees with what, and that's a different story. So just what kind of story are you trying to tell?
Yeah, definitely positives to both. Sarah Beth says, I have camped on the Arkansas in Colorado.
Nice.
Britain, some Okie dude, also from Oklahoma. Phil loves the artwork. I'm going to give everybody like another little slow, if I can get it in frame here. The colors in this are so pretty, and it's way prettier in person than it even is on stream, because the internet likes to
it does
fade out colors.
The artist, the one thing we talked about, like all the other things, like we gave the description, like I want to look this, I want to look like that. But the thing with the colors streaked on the first book, he's like, well, I wanted there to be the colors of blood and salt. That was his thing. I didn't say
that's cool. Yeah. Yeah, especially right up here at the top. That's so cool. I love when like collaborative art is so fun.
Yeah.
That's very cool. Matt loves The Little Prince. My husband is a big fan also.
I want to read it now because I loved Wind, Sand, and Stars so much.
Yeah, my husband Ben absolutely loved it. Do you like the hardcover version of your book or the trade? So which one should they buy?
So I'm going to be honest. I think, and this is a weird reason to prefer the hardcover, but I am a map person. And the map is bigger in the hardcover.
In the hardcover.
For a larger size for the hardcover. It also has slightly bigger print because I felt like that would just looked better. So I just loved how big the map is.
Yeah.
And that for me, and also I just feel like some of the artwork, I feel like I can see a little bit more of the details. Now I haven't seen the hardcover for book 2 yet. So, I mean, that's still in the mail. Those look, but for book 1, I think while for practical reading, I actually prefer the paperback. If I'm just holding it and saying, oh,
yeah. Well, and that's, I can attest to, these are wonderfully floppy paperbacks.
Yeah,
so if anybody wants, there's the flop test.
Definitely for me, if I was just going with the one that just kind of makes my heart beat a little faster, it's the hardcover.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I'd have to say that it's close though. It's close.
Yeah. Well, and I will probably end up getting the hardcovers at some point as well. But for anybody who is wondering, it is still very visible because that's something that I always look for in the paperback too. So either or. But yeah, I can't wait to get my hands on a hardcover.
Davies, I don't know if you've ever read the Lady Trent books.
I haven't, but I've heard of them.
He did the maps for the Lady Trent books.
Oh, so cool. Very nice.
Wow, he's willing to do map for me.
I know. The gentleman who did my map for my upcoming fantasy Western book is also, he's gotten quite a lot more notice now. But originally he was really popular because he made the First Law map for Joe Abercrombie. And I don't think it was commissioned by the author, but he was just like, we need a map for this world, and made it. And it's kind of become the official thing now. And yeah, he did my map for Cold Silver and it looks amazing. So artists are so cool.
I know.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I'll probably own both of these books in all 3 versions at some point. So, because you got to have the nice one that you can put on your shelf, and then you got to have the annotated version.
The one that you can scribble in.
The one you can scribble in, and then you got to have the one on the Kindle so you can take it with you everywhere. So really just get all 3.
Absolutely. I'm not going to tell anyone not to do that.
Redmond says, hello, looking forward to reading your books. And Capricious Fox wants to know if you can repeat the author of the rock book.
It's Kanan Makia, but I'm going to put it up on the screen so you can hopefully see it.
Here, I will write it in the...
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he's I read another book by him called The Republic of Fear, which was about life under Saddam, and he's an Iraqi author, and I love the way he writes. His writing style is very beautiful.
Nice. That is a area that I've read a lot of different authors from a lot of different places, but I've never read an Iraqi author, so I'll have to check it out.
It's really good so far. I mean, I'm 80 pages. We could go disastrously from here, but
but for now.
Amazing.
Zach says, big map. I love flipping between the map and the pages, always.
Me too.
And the lovely part about Jamie's map in her book is that the places she mentions in the book are actually on the map, which you would think should be a normal thing, but it isn't always in fantasy. And sometimes I'm like, wait, where is this? And you're sitting there looking for like 10 minutes and can't find it. Matt says, love the Lady Trent maps.
Yeah, I think they're very beautiful. I was so thrilled.
Yeah. So can you give us, as kind of a closeout, could you give us a general idea? So you've got book 2 is coming out on February 25th next year. Do you have kind of a general timeline of when you think the last book in the trilogy is going to be coming out?
All right. So I think that, so I'm at about 60,000 words, and my guess is that that's about not a little over a third of the way. So, I mean, that's guesstimating. And I am slow. I am deliberate. I don't stop, but I'm definitely one of those who can sit there for 2 hours and like, wow, I got 100 words out of that.
Same.
Well, I don't have a specific timeline. I think in a perfect world, if I'm able to just continue at this very steady, slow pace that I'm at, I would probably hope to finish this book maybe sometime in the like fall time frame, you know, and then, you know, go through the revision process, and that will take however long it takes. So ideally it would come out in sometime in 2026.
Yeah.
So, awesome. But no, I'm not going to like try and pin that at any point.
That's fair. Yeah, that's fair.
You want to like do it justice. And I want to make sure that I am bringing all the threads to fruition, and like all the emotional impact is there. And so I don't want to rush myself. I want to make sure that I stick the landing. That's very important.
Totally understand that. Dark Engine wants to know what we think about footnotes. Any footnotes for optional reading? It depends on the series. I usually skip over footnotes unless
it depends. Like, well, yeah. Are we talking like fiction, non-fiction, like Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell? Then the footnotes are wonderful because they actually just flesh out this.
Or Terry Pratchett.
Yeah, there's certain books where I've had. There also the Wingfeather Saga has fun.
Yep.
So if you're talking fiction, I think you can make footnotes really clever and fun, but it requires a certain type of reader and a certain type of patience. Yep. If we're talking like nonfiction, then just go wild, like have
all the footnotes.
Yeah, no, I actually am a footnote reader. It depends. There are some I guess there are some subjects where I might skip over them because I'm like, yeah, that's not my thing. But if it's like something where it's like going to flesh something out in, you know, and be like, oh, well, the translate, like as a language person,
I'm sure
sometimes the footnote will have to do with the origin of a word or it's used this way. Like I'm reading some books by Jonathan Sachs right now. And so he's talking a lot about the original Hebrew in the Torah and stuff like that. So he'll sometimes like have a footnote that says, well, this is from this part of the Talmud, and this rabbi said this, and that rabbi said that. And I'm like, that's fascinating. So like, I'm like, go for it. But I do realize that that's not for everybody. And it kind of just depends on how much you care about the topic.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Chris Navo says, always love me a good map. Sold, just ordered the hardcover of book 1. Love it. Chris, I think you're going to love it. It's so good. Britton says, Strange and Norrell is great. My husband just finished reading that.
I really enjoyed that book.
I've read Piranesi by her, but not Strange and Mr. Norrell yet.
I have Piranesi, but I haven't read it yet.
It's quite good. I enjoyed it a lot. It's very good. McScarfield is back. It has read the first 2 chapters of By Blood, by Salt while we were talking, I guess. That's amazing. The Marowans give a mix of Rome, British Empire, and a slight tinge of Mesoamerica, Mesopotamia, with their blood sacrifices for their goddess.
That is impressive. I won't say like I said, I don't do 1-to-1 matches for the most. There are a couple that are a little close, but I do like medleys of inspirations, and that's
pretty close.
Pretty close.
Yeah, that is pretty close.
Middle Eastern one's in there too, but he's not this.
Love that. I hope you enjoy the rest of it as well.
So too.
Dark Engine says, perhaps even in the context of fantasy sci-fi and from the writer's standpoint, I suspect if I ever attempted anything of scale, I would lack the discipline to omit. That is tricky. And like knowing what to cut.
Yeah, and that's where you have to decide what is the intent of your footnotes. Like, for instance, in Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, the intent of the footnotes is that this kind of is being approached from like as a history and almost like an academic work. And so it's informing you of things that aren't immediately crucial to the plot or the story, but still give it more oomph because you
Yeah.
get to, like, because it's an alternate history. And so having those nice little footnotes to tell you a little bit more about that alternate history is kind of fun. It's not
Absolutely.
necessary, but it's fun. If you're just doing it because it's like, I couldn't omit this, but it doesn't, and it does, I mean, I didn't want to omit this, but it doesn't belong in the story, then that's where you have to decide, like, are you trying to tell a story about the story? Or is that just for fun because you didn't want to cut it? You have to
Yeah.
just, what is its purpose? That would be what I
Yeah.
would do.
It's amazing how writing epic fantasy will very quickly help you figure out what's really important to you and what isn't. Because, I mean, when you're building your own world, you could be there for days.
Yeah, and you could go on forever and ever. That's one thing for me is where I'm like, I have all these things that I know. How much of this does the reader need to know in order for the story to be meaningful to them?
Right.
And sometimes those little extraneous details really make things more meaningful
They
to the
do.
reader because they make it feel more real and more layered. But other times
Mhm.
they're just like, okay, fine. I didn't need to know that. It's distracting me from the character that I really care about or the thing that's really going on. So that is like when you figure out the perfect like thing to know which ones need to go in and which ones don't, like all writers will come.
Monetize that. Zin, grab the Kindle edition. Hope you enjoy it, Zin. There's a really hey, don't never say never.
We're a little ways off from that. Give me some time.
Yeah. Well, Zin, I hope you enjoy it. McScarfield says lists of references and influences is sort of my thing. Yeah, I love seeing that extra layer too. Or, you know, I've been reading a lot of Terry Pratchett this year, and his footnotes are absolutely hysterical because they're always like cultural.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of give you a little bit of nuance, but they're always like these ridiculous customs or like it's great.
Yeah, I love stuff like that. Stuff
I
like
do
that.
too. Yeah, especially with, and because everybody get out your bingo cards. If you're listening to the audio versions of the City Watch, Bill Nye, Davy Jones, not the science guy, reads the footnotes. No, not the science guy. The Davy Jones Bill Nye reads the footnotes.
Oh,
and that's all he does in the audio.
Actually, he reads the footnotes and someone else is reading everything.
Yes.
That's fun.
It's amazing. Yeah, they have the main narrator, John Culshaw, who's an impressionist, and he's phenomenal audiobook narrator. And then the character of Death, who's in all of the Discworld series, is played by Peter Serafinowicz, who has an amazing, deep, gravelly, death-like voice. And then Bill Nye reads the footnotes, and it's a beautiful thing. Okay, well, as a final reminder to everyone, if you haven't checked it out yet, there are links to the book versions down in the description box, and also Jamie's website, so you can keep up to date with everything that she's doing. And when book 3 comes out, you'll be the first to know. And Jamie, thank you so much for hanging out with us this evening, and I am so excited. I'm so excited to read this book. I just want to throw out my entire TBR right now and read it. So I will probably be, this might be my Christmas read. We'll see.
Oh man.
So excited. Oh, me too. Trust me. Let's see. Ryan says, thank you for a chat. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with us. I hope you all have a wonderful holiday season and a Merry Christmas. And if you're watching the replay, we appreciate you as well. And yeah, Jamie, if there's anything else you want to share before we jump out.
I think I'm good. I had a blast. Thank you. So
I would love to have you back on sometime. We'll delve into something else.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. I hope you are all reading 5-star reads. I hope you're having a great week.